Before I start, I just want to point out that 66% of design teachers have all been trained and worked in early years education, which was clear from our, at least two of our last three speakers that were just on. 20 years ago, I doubt you would have found an early years trained teacher in a shop or a workshop as such, so things certainly have changed. I'm going to ask you to do something for me, please, before I begin. I know we're running a little bit late and you've been sitting still for quite a bit. Now, here's an option for you. This presentation is really about reform process for educational leaders. If you're interested in that, I welcome you to stay. I haven't completed the journey. The journey is really halfway through or just beginning. Oh, that's useful. I don't even know how to use it. If you're thinking you're going to get a complete story, you're not. You may get some ideas about how we'd go about and perhaps the rationales for the work we're doing in a wonderful little school that I'm associated with. So this is what I'd like you to do. If you just listen carefully and follow instructions, I would appreciate it. I want you to stand up, not now, just in a minute, stand up, walk around for a little bit and make your way to the front down here. Right, because you've all been sitting for a long time. Now, for those who aren't interested in trying to reform a school or at least change it a little bit, transform it a little bit, here's your opportunity to sort of sneak out quietly in a very polite way. If I'm left with three people at the front here, I really don't mind. I'd like you to stay, of course. Could you stand up and make your way forward and stretch your legs while you're doing that? I'll give you about maybe 30 seconds. Thank you very much. I appreciate it and I hope you had a chance to stretch your legs a little bit. I'm Ken Sell. I'm lucky enough at this point in my life to be the head of school at Aoba-Japan International School in Tokyo. It's a wonderful city. It's got low-tech, high-tech and no-tech. I have to disclose 13 years of teaching, classroom teaching predominantly in the early years. I was involved in a fairly disruptive teacher education program at the turn of the century when the term 21st century was really valid. I was fortunate enough to be a leader in a high school or a secondary school, and that was an experience that I'll never forget. Dabbled a little bit in some international aid around education. Spent a number of years in Norway to see how the Scandinavians operate. A little bit of time in China, my gap year, and I've ended up in Japan. This presentation, I hope, will be of interest to you, but it's really about a process for teacher reform, if you like, or transformation in a school around blended learning and how do we enable that or embed that into our curriculum. It's an invitation for you to join the school and myself and my colleagues and our kids, as well as the company that owns the school, a company called BBT, Business Breakthrough. They have the largest online university in Japan and have won awards, not in education, but in economics, trade and other areas. I have the pleasure of working with those people simply because this particular school we're involved in at the moment, or I'm involved in, is heavily engaged in supporting the Japanese reform agenda. When I listened this morning and I thought about Singapore, they have had a steady flow of work that they've done over a number of years and are continually reforming, transforming and changing what they're doing in a very systematic, coherent way. Japan, the last time they reformed, changed, moved their curriculum around was in 1947. Japan at the moment is looking over their shoulder at what's happening around them. wondering how on earth they're going to actually survive into this future, wondering what it is that they need to do. I'm very honoured to be working with the people I'm working with, who are responsible for the official report for the Fukushima disaster, commissioned by the government and the company that owned it. 400 and something odd pages, maybe more, explaining why it was, in essence, that the thinking of the country enabled the generators to be placed below sea level, next to the sea. Had that one decision been changed to putting it above sea level, to be putting it somewhere else, the meltdown would not have occurred. BBT, as Business Breakthrough, are very concerned with the education system in Japan and wondering how on earth they could change it. The Prime Minister's much the same. They decided that they would have 200 IB schools, mainly diploma schools, but now they're realising they should be perhaps elementary and middle schools as well. I think they set something like a 5-year target. We're into the second year, they've got 5 of them. We've estimated that they need 1 per week to meet their target, and now they've rearranged it a little bit and decided perhaps if you're just a candidacy school, that would be good. So that's part of the context. By tertiary education, they deal in tertiary education, they realised it was too late. So they bought this lovely little school that we're part of and have asked myself, my colleagues and those around how we might change it, how we might turn it into a school that resonates with what's happening, what we've seen today, that is able to provide, if you like, examples, support for others who want to engage in changing the world. The context of this school and others I've been interested in generally are run down, in a sense, both physically and indeed in terms of the intellectual property within the schools and emotionally. I've been lucky enough to do a little bit of research around professional capital and its impact. I'm exceptionally interested in how teachers as researchers can support change in schools. What does that mean? How do we do it? And I'm beginning to dabble in what are the elements required for a school to transform itself from a textbook-driven, old-fashioned museum, as was quoted earlier today, into one that might be described where every space is a makerspace. It was a challenge and we're on our way. According to my clock, I've got about 14 minutes to quickly tell you what we have been doing and what we intend to do. For those of you who are expecting to get a series of blended learning strategies, as is the title, I am sorry. I don't have them for you. I apologise deeply. But for those of you who know that sometimes it's really difficult to move schools, to change them, to work around, to rearrange, I hope you'll find something interesting in what I have to say. I use the word flipped because back in 2011, maybe 2009, I met a person who did a really good job in flipping the classroom. But what intrigued me was how limiting it was. It was this one particular person working really hard. It was disconnected from the curriculum and it wasn't embedded. Recently, I've looked at curriculums, and in the IB, for example, in the planning forms, they say things like, let's look at inquiry learning, conceptual understanding, and then there's a little box that say, how are you going to use technology? For me, that's like saying, let's go and do a whole lot of teaching, but how are you going to use the pencil or the pen? Now, if you notice, back when the printing press had been invented, it took 300-400 years, and then we really got hold of it. And hence, this robust system that we've been working in the last 100 or 2 years. So, the question for us was, how do we really embed action, if you like, anchor in the curriculum the use of technology. So that it doesn't sit over the side, so there are no excuses for not engaging in it. It's a difficult thing to do, I believe, but it's quite possible. So we're going to, why do we flip? What's this thing called flipping? You need a compelling story. If you listened to Paul earlier, the American school in Japan, he had a compelling story. The disaster of the earthquake, the drop in numbers, time to change, look outside, not inwards. Flipping conditions. Every school has a set of conditions which enable or otherwise them to change. There are conditions of empowerment. Creating those conditions is a task for us all as educators, in my humble view. I don't believe we empower anybody. I certainly believe we create conditions for empowerment to occur for each and every individual, and understanding that. The flipper. Who does the flipping, if you like? People. I was going to use that word, pedagogy. And partnerships. I said anti-flippant. Why did I write that? I apologise. I've got no idea until I thought about it. Sometimes if we just consider it, if we do not consider what we are doing in a considered manner, it is flippant of us. That's all I can say to that. So therefore, the seriousness of what we're about, to me, needs to be accounted for. And fully flipped, how do we know? How do we know that? Let me just quickly run through the slides. See what we come up with. Not a lot. We've just recently engaged a university to do a literature review for us on this thing called blended learning. I think it, for me anyway, it resonates. We looked at that and we thought to ourselves, if it is an add-on, if it's just sort of put over the top of something, if we pulled it out from here and we'll put it over to there, it's not good enough in terms of our school or any, in my humble view. So we asked, or we made this statement so we could get a better idea of what it is. We're going to use technology to maximise face-to-face learning. The technology we use will maximise face-to-face learning. Or in other words, maximising face-to-face learning could be supported by the technology. And we made it a deliberate attempt to frame it that way. We're also going to maximise the understanding, teacher understanding of their impact on the learning. Now they're the two elements that we're using. We've engaged in it, we've started it, we're talking about it. A couple of things drop out of it. What's face-to-face learning mean in today's world? How do we understand that? What do we do with it? Where's technology located in the process of pedagogy, the teaching of it, etc., etc. Flipping conditions. We need to know, and we've done this already, is our school ready for it? Well, the question is, ready for what? We've talked about it, we've discussed it, the conditions, if you like, for teacher empowerment, because it will create and does create learner empowerment. But here we're using a device by William called the ACE Capability Index. Look him up, he's very good. He asks questions of your staff, of the people you're working with. You can get to understand each and every individual in your organisation. Are they aligned? And they can say, yep, I'm with you all the way. Are they capable? Perhaps not. Do they know what to do? Perhaps not. And indeed, are they engaged? I suggest if you're interested in this, have a look at what they're doing, and it gives you a good insight into where each teacher and your school is at in relation to readiness for moving into different phases. The machine has stopped, so, oh no, it's back. No, it's gone. No, it's back. No, it's gone. I'm up to 0 minutes. There is a slight technical hitch. I can't... Okay. Sorry about that. People, pedagogy and partnership. Clearly, well, not clearly in my humble view, because it's not clear if it's in my view, but apologies for that. I've done some work with other schools, some research and practical application. If your school is in a position where it needs to change and likes to change, my suggestion is fairly simple. Look at social capital for your people. Read about it. Look at the great work that Lena did in New York. Demonstrates clearly that social capital is the key to developing human and decisional capital, and one of the keys for bringing it together. Pedagogy. The assumption that we all know it, we all know how to do it, we all know what it is. My argument here would simply be, get your troops together and have discussions, talk about it, define what it is, because it's the mechanism for flipping. And partnerships. A reasonably straightforward thing, one would argue. We use partnerships with BBT because they have an air campus, they have technical support, they have great intellectual capacities, but we also use universities. And we use universities as an outside source to give us some indications about where and where we might need to go. It seems common sense that we should all have a shared understanding about how the act of teaching in a classroom or outside of a classroom. But much of what we're doing is assuming, if you like, and we see it in today's conference, that that's already in place in most places. Well, my experience